Hey everyone, welcome to Retire with Style. I'm Alex and I'm here with Wade. And today we're going to start a mini arc within the larger arc on tax efficiency here. We're going to be focusing on withdrawal order sequencing as part of tax efficient retirement distribution strategies. Wade?
Yeah, and introducing the topic. This is really to fully complete the discussion of the topic. We need to talk a lot more about some of the pitfalls that you run into. But yeah, this will be introducing the concepts of withdrawal order sequencing.
And this is something that I would say has been in the forefront over the last 5 years. Advisors even have access to. There's some softwares that are dedicated just for withdrawal order sequencing and optimizing that. Simply, our hobby horse has been taxes are something you can manage. And if you do this efficiently, you'd be surprised how much quote unquote alpha you can extract. And not by finding hidden gems, but really from just being smart about how you handle your taxes. It does lead to a big bottom line number as opposed to saving 1 year on such and such. It has a compounding effect because it's more money that you're leaving invested.
Mm-hmm. It's just the idea we have to pay taxes at some point. So looking for opportunities where we can pay them at a lower rate than at a higher rate. And
Yeah.
that adds up over time and can have a big impact on long-term planning for sure. We've seen these kind of tax alpha type numbers of 0.3, 0.4%, which means like on an after-tax basis, the investment returns you're getting through this tax efficiency is like another 30 or 40 basis points of annual returns on your investments.
Yeah.
So that's
And
big.
again, 1% is 100 basis points. So
Mhm.
30 to 40 basis point is, 0.30 or 0.40 of a percent. So it adds up. And I got to
Good point.
stress the irony of all ironies is folks over engineer distribution rates quite a bit where is the 4% strategy working, or can I do 4.3% this year, or can I do 3.7% this year? I don't know who it is. Morningstar, Vanguard, somebody loves to sort of throw out the new number this year is drum roll, 3.57, that kind of thing. And the reality is, it's the amount that you can really save just from the doing this tax efficiently adds again 30 to 40 bips to a potential distribution strategy, and that falls on deaf ears a lot of times.
Yeah, I
And
guess maybe the irony there is most of the studies about safe spending rates ignore taxes. It's not part of the analysis. So they're pinpointing very precise numbers while ignoring something that is because what you really care about is your after-tax spending, not your pre-tax spending. And this can have a big impact on your after-tax spending.
and there it is. All right,
Yeah.
so withdrawal sequencing, Wade, and I know we've spoken about this on previous episodes, the types of accounts, but because folks just they want to jump in, jump out of certain episodes, maybe we do a little bit of a preamble with regards to the types of accounts that there are before we go through their sequencing order. What say you,
Mhm.
good sir?
That sounds great. Yeah. So in past episodes, a few episodes back, we talked about the three broad types of accounts in the U.S. tax code. You've got your taxable brokerage accounts, which you pay taxes on an ongoing basis on any interest or dividends. You do get deferral for long-term gains until they're realized, until you sell the asset, and you get preferential tax treatment for qualified dividends and long-term gains. It's a different and lower set of tax rates. And also you get a step up in basis on any long-term gains at death. But so in the long run, it can have advantages, but it's really the least efficient on an ongoing basis because it's the only one of the accounts that's forcing income to be taxable every year, just as your investments are paying either interest or dividends. So that's the taxable brokerage accounts. Then you've got the tax deferred accounts. These are where the government's incentivizing retirement savings by incentivizing you to save money for retirement. So you get to deduct up to limits the amount you put into these tax deferred accounts. These are IRAs, 401ks, that sort of thing. You get tax deferral. And then when the distributions come out, they're taxed as ordinary income, which is a disadvantage if you have like stocks and things that have a lot of long-term capital gains. They'll come out as ordinary income instead of long-term capital gains. And then these accounts are the ones that are impacted by the RMDs. That was the subject of our previous episode. But that's the tax-deferred accounts. And then you have the tax-exempt or Roth accounts, which are a newer innovation, and they're very nice. You do put after-tax money into these accounts, so you don't get any tax deduction on the money going into the tax-exempt accounts. But then you never pay taxes again on qualified distributions. You get tax deferral, and the distributions are not taxable either. They do not go into the adjusted gross income. So they're a really handy resource for being able to meet spending needs without generating any sort of adjusted gross income. Those are your Roth accounts, Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks, that sort of thing. So those are the three account types that we're generally talking about in retirement. How do we want to spend from those accounts
Now,
to have more tax efficiency?
Did you say them in that order on purpose, or you were just using the Holy Spirit to guide you?
That's the same order we covered them in the previous episode, but I suppose there is some.
I meant it because from a sequencing standpoint, that's kind of the order.
Yeah, that's so.
As
it happens to be the case, the conventional wisdom, and we're going to do better than the conventional wisdom in the podcast, but we're still going to be tied in spirit to the conventional wisdom, is that you spend down the taxable accounts first, then you spend down the tax deferred accounts, and then you spend down the tax exempt accounts. Now, we'll improve upon that, but still, that's a guiding sort of framework. Really, the answer is you spend a blend of taxable and tax deferred first, and then once taxable is gone, you'll spend a blend of tax deferred and tax exempt. But you still have that basic withdrawal order sequencing of taxables getting the biggest priority to come out first, then tax deferred, and then tax exempt at the end.
Now, someone may say why, and just for me, it's you have less of a tax drag if you get rid of the taxable, if you spend from the taxable first, because there's always, you're getting taxed on dividends, you're getting et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and you don't have that from the tax deferred or tax exempt. Hence, it makes a lot of sense from that. You may have some assets within it that are tax efficient, but that's okay. You could always, because let me backtrack a hair. When you do your allocation, it's going to be a household allocation. Like the taxable account shouldn't mirror the allocation of the tax deferred account. It shouldn't mirror the allocation of the tax exempt account. A lot of folks do that. I think it's suboptimal. It may mentally help them, but it's suboptimal on a lot of levels from a return standpoint specifically. And so from that standpoint, you want to look at all of these three accounts as one household allocation. And so different holdings will be in different types of accounts. We covered that in previous episodes. But what happens, though, it's in your taxable account, you're going to have some underlying holdings inside of that account that may be tax inefficient on a yearly basis. So to the degree, which means effectively, if an asset returns 5% a year, but it's tax efficient, you may only see 2.5% of that return, kind of thing. I'm just throwing out numbers. And so to the extent that you're taking monies from those accounts first, you're going to have less future tax drag on the entirety of your portfolio going forward. Wade, is there a more concise way you can potentially say that? Oh, I'm sure there is.
Yeah, right.
So why don't you say that more concisely?
Yeah, the taxable accounts are spitting off taxable income every year, so they're creating a tax drag. And that's why it generally points to trying to spend them down first. Now, the exception to that would be if you're at the point where you're going to be leaving a legacy, you're not going to be running out of money. In particular, you might be in a position where you could also bequest a large amount of taxable assets. You might want to stop generating those long-term capital gains by selling shares to cover your spending because of that step up in basis that would be available to your beneficiaries at death. But for the common person who's not going to have a huge legacy and still have their taxable accounts at that late in life point, that's where the most efficient approach is. Go ahead and spend those down more quickly to get that ongoing tax drag out of your tax picture, especially before RMDs later start on the tax deferred accounts.
Okay, and so this is a tax-driven theme we're running here.
Yeah, and So
Well,
after that, you mentioned the asset location. After our asset location episode, what we talked about there was usually like your stock index funds are in your taxable accounts, your bonds are in your tax deferred accounts, and your less tax efficient growth assets are in your Roth accounts. And that really, from the withdrawal order sequencing, the Roth accounts make sense. It's going to be the longest period of time before you spend those. So you want your kind of riskiest, longest time horizon type assets there. But there is a issue. Usually we want to be spending from bonds, but we're saying put your stock index funds in your taxable accounts and your bonds in your tax deferred accounts. But we're also saying spend your taxable accounts first, spend your tax deferred accounts later. So there's a conflict there. And we had a couple of folks write in asking about that conflict. I think the basic answer to it is what we talked about in that episode. Asset allocation should always be the driver, not asset location. You have to think about your asset allocation first. Here, probably like withdrawal order sequencing should be the driver. And what it really means is, even though it may be less tax efficient to have bonds, or really we may be talking about shorter term fixed income assets in your taxable account, you might want a bucket of short-term fixed income assets in your taxable account to help manage that sequence of returns risk, because that's what you'll use to cover your spending, even though the asset location argument is all your bonds should be in your tax deferred account. The practical implication of wanting to be able to spend in an efficient manner in retirement might tell you really better have some fixed income in your taxable account to cover those upcoming spending needs. Then the rest of the taxable account, then you can follow asset location at that point. So the rest of the taxable account is your tax efficient index funds for stocks and so forth. Then your tax deferred account would be the remainder of your fixed income allocation, everything else being the same, and so on and so forth.
okay. Now, as we start this, and again, if any listeners have questions while we're discussing it, send them in. If we can work them into these episodes, we'll happy to do so. If not, we'll probably set up a YouTube live session where we just do like a Q&A, kind of traditional radio call-in show. But okay, when we talk about the next phase, how do you recommend it goes about, how we go about doing it? And this touches on marginal rate tax management and the like. What's a good starting point, but how can we improve upon that?
Yeah, so the guiding principle as we move away from the conventional wisdom, effective marginal tax rate management. And it's really a concept developed by Joe Elsasser. He's an advisor based out of Omaha, and he's developed software. It's for financial advisors. He's got the Covasum suite of software that includes tools that can do the same sort of analysis that I'm describing in these podcasts. It's effective marginal tax rate management. So it accounts for the fact that we do have to pay taxes, as we talked about in the very first episode of the ARC. We have a progressive tax system in the US, so generally your taxes go up as your income goes up. The tax rate goes up as your income goes up, the marginal tax rate. But we also have all these non-linearities. We have how drawing income can also cause more of Social Security to be taxed, can lead to higher Medicare premiums, can lead to the loss of subsidies if you get your health insurance through the Affordable Care Act, can push your long-term gains from the 0% bracket into the 15% bracket. There's all these other things that can happen as you generate income. And so the effective marginal tax rate is like, it's not just the federal income tax brackets at this point, but if I take another dollar out of my IRA, how much total taxes am I going to have to pay on that dollar after accounting for all these other aspects of the tax code? And we've introduced all that, but we'll have future episodes where we dig more into the Social Security rules, taxation rules, the Medicare premium rules, and so forth. That'll be coming in further episodes. But that's going to be the structure where when we say we have to pay taxes, let's look for opportunities to do it at lower rates to avoid having to pay taxes at higher rates. That analysis, this effective marginal tax rate analysis, is implicitly including all those other factors in the discussion.
Wade, something you mentioned, and because this is where we're at a bit of a imbalance here, where we're talking about how to do it, but we're pointing out softwares that advisors have access to, because they don't. If they presented it to consumers, I don't think they'd be a market for it. Although maybe our listeners are thinking, yeah, of course I would use it. But the reality is, it gets very difficult from a client servicing standpoint and the like, and so they go through advisors because it just scales, frankly, a lot better. But uh, this, I just want to take a moment. This is when you're thinking about planning, what happens within a financial plan and the like. This is specifically a lot of the meat to the sandwich when you're talking about a retirement income distribution plan, what goes into it, and things along those lines. Really, this is one of the main components of it. If you're a consumer but don't have access to an advisor, are we kind of like teasing them a little bit by talking about what they should be doing, but without the ability to do something like that? And I know I'm going off script, but I'm thinking of consumers that are listening in, wondering, yeah, but how do I do that? How do I do that? And obviously, listen, call us at McLean. There's that kind of thing. But I'm just curious, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I do feel bad when I get the emails saying, okay, I read your chapter in your book. Now, how can I do this myself? And the reality is, because I've written programs to do all this, but they're not interactive programs. They don't have a user interface, and they only can work with specific scenarios. Like whenever with my programs, if there's two people, you always have to list the older person first. Like it's not generalizable. It'd be easy to break the program if I tried to make it available to others, because they'd put in scenarios that were not accounted for in the program.
So that made me add to this, without making it seem like an ad, though. Listen, if everyone if this is something that's a significant pain point, and you're thinking, man, I would just like to have a tax analysis of distributions or whatever, give us a holler over at retirementresearcher.com or mcleanam.com. And we do have just a standalone planning service. I know it sounds like an in-stream ad, if you will, but the reality is I want to address this now, so folks are not like having trepidation while they're listening to you about, oh my God, how do I do this myself? The reality is, I would, if I'm a consumer, I would then listen to this with the mindset of, this is what's available within a professional relationship if you want to take your tax efficiency to the next level, which, frankly, the savings justified. I'll leave it at that, and you can continue with your thought process. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, and also, even if you're not doing the full lifetime analytical plan about exactly how much to convert every year, still there's a lot of value in just understanding the principles at work. And some of these concepts, just as you are thinking about your 1040, not drawing income in an unnecessary manner that triggers really unfortunate side effects like higher Medicare premiums. Or you got to remember that 0% long-term capital gains bracket, when you start pushing capital gains into the 15% bracket, that's really a double whammy on your taxes. And so just being aware of these kinds of things and managing that on a year-to-year basis, there's still a lot of value in that, even if you're not taking it to the next iteration of, here's a full lifetime tax analysis, which consumer-facing software doesn't really do a good job with. Other than I have not fully analyzed Larry Kotlikov's Maxify. It may be the one consumer, because he's very technical. I think his software may do a good job.
Yeah,
but none of the other consumer-facing software can do what we're talking about.
Yeah, and it's not that they don't want to. It's just there's not a strong enough business case to do that, because the moment they do that, there'll be a lot of user error, and within that, they would have to load up their margins would disappear. So they just don't even bother, from that perspective. And they provide it to advisors because, advisors are certified to do that. And the CFP, RICP, et cetera, et cetera. And so they figured if we provide it to advisors, it's a much more seamless process for us as a business.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, the idea that we're going to start getting into is when you start doing tax efficient analysis, the idea is generally, it's true for everything with retirement income planning. The short-term sacrifice creates long-term benefits. And it's the same with this tax efficient discussion, because it may require things like Roth conversions, which really mean you're just paying taxes sooner than you had to. But you do that because this helps set up the opportunity to pay. And it's not just less taxes over your lifetime, but it's more have higher after-tax wealth over your lifetime. Because, of course, one way to minimize your taxes, if you talk about a tax-free retirement, you just destroy your asset base, do some terrible investments. You don't have any money. You're not going to pay any taxes. So we're not talking about just minimizing taxes, to be clear. We're talking about getting the most after-tax wealth. And short-term tax payments can help lay that foundation for greater long-term after-tax wealth. So that's really what we're talking about here. And to do that, you fill up, you generate taxable income when you can do it relatively low effective marginal tax rates. And then once you get to the point where you want more money to spend, but if you generate more taxable income to do that, the effective marginal tax rate could be quite high. So you put the brakes on taking it from taxable income sources, and you instead draw from sources that create less taxable income, whether that is the Roth, which does not go into adjusted gross income, qualified distributions from a Roth IRA or 401k, or whether that's selling some of your shares in a taxable brokerage account, which part of that will be a cost basis that's not taxed. And then part of that, if you've held the shares for at least a year, will be the long-term capital gains that are taxed at a lower rate than ordinary income.
Okay, and you said it earlier, and we did do a little preamble on the types of accounts, but when it comes to tax rates, just as a quick and dirty, remember it starts at 10% tax rate. It can go all the way to 37%, and there's an incremental, it goes up incrementally, especially from 22 to 24 to 32, 35, 37. But the key here is at the lower rates, that's when you see these like gap ups in rates. And you had said it earlier in a sentence, but I think that's where the game is at in terms of really trying to, on a proportionate level, eke out those savings. Because yeah, you're right, you pay less in taxes, but really what it's about is it's not getting your account to zero so you can say I don't have any taxes to pay. It's really the less you pay in taxes, the more remains invested. The more that remains invested, the more compounding you have, hence a virtuous cycle. But you may want to jump in on that, how the taxes at the lower rates really gap up, and so it's important to keep that in mind.
Yeah, these episodes are really for like the middle class, mass affluent type retirees who have saved some money. If you haven't saved anything, there's not much to do, but who've got some savings. But we're not talking about like the ultra high net worth type individuals, because when you do get to the higher tax brackets, the additional increases are relatively small, so that there's not going to be as big of impact available. But for middle class folks, managing that jump from the 12% bracket to the 22% bracket, which if the tax law, if there's not any change in current tax rates in 2026, it'll be the same sort of jump, but from 15% to 25%. That's a huge jump. And that happens this year at $47,150 of taxable income for single people, $94,300 for married filing jointly. So it's kind of middle class, upper middle class. I think that the kinds of folks that are probably tending to listen to the podcast, where being able to manage that divide, like filling up the 12% to stay out of the 22% in the following years, that's a big advantage. And very close to those same levels, it's not exactly the same for whatever reason, but very close to there, $125 difference for singles, $250 difference for couples, is where the long-term or the preferential income taxes switch from the 0% bracket to the 15% bracket. It's at $47,025 for singles, $94,050 for married filing jointly. So generating long-term capital gains up to those thresholds, where there's no other secondary nonlinear factors yet. But if it's just that, you're generating taxable income, but you'll pay at a 0% rate. And then that can help perhaps to avoid in later years having to pay more of those gains at a 15% rate. So staying in 0 to avoid 15 or staying in 12 to avoid 22, there's potentially a lot of value in that. And that's where this discussion has the most relevance. When we talk about that tax alpha, those numbers, that 30 or 40 basis point type idea, that's really in these kinds of scenarios where we're able to manage these divides and also potentially manage not paying taxes on the full 85% of the Social Security benefits. That's where you can see the most value. And that's more of a middle class consideration than it is kind of a high net worth type
I will say
consideration.
this though, Wade. It's not to say that you ignore it at the high net worth, because nominally it's still a lot of money. It's just
Mm-hmm.
proportionate to the overall wealth. I get it, but
And it may
still,
be that
no one's
tax
going to take
alpha
$10,000, put it in the kitchen table, and just watch it burn for the hell of it. You know what I mean? No matter how much money you have.
but it's just a tax alpha maybe more like 10 basis
A
points
hundred
instead of
percent.
40
Yeah, yeah,
basis
no, I
points
get it. But that 10 basis points
because the jumps
nominally
are smaller.
is a
Uh-huh.
lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's nothing to sneeze at. So, but it's not, to be clear, we're not just doing these episodes for the ultra wealthy. It's most relevant for the not ultra wealthy.
Yeah,
It's kind of
exactly.
the point there.
All right. And so with that, does it make sense then? If you're taking it from the taxable at the beginning, are there some sort of sacrifices that are made? Because you were saying you're paying now, to save in the future. That's really you're just paying more in taxes right now, but over time there's going to be a break even you'll see that it's going to make a lot more sense.
Yeah, and actually that break even may not even exist if you've got a lot of IRAs and you're thinking the beneficiaries will be your adult children, and maybe they're high earners and they're likely to inherit these when they're in their 50s. They may face much higher tax rates on an inherited IRA than you would face doing the Roth conversion. And if that's the scenario you're talking about, there is no kind of break even or there is no short-term sacrifice. You are paying taxes sooner than necessary, but you're doing that because immediately you're increasing the after-tax legacy value of those assets. You don't have to wait for the long term. If you did a Roth conversion this year and passed away the following year, the after-tax legacy value would be higher because you did a Roth conversion at a lower rate than those new inherited IRA owners would be paying as they distribute over that 10-year window.
That is the transition I was looking for, but I want to make sure we're not being confusing to the audience as we brought up that little caveat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, if we're not talking about the beneficiaries, then it's back to short-term sacrifice for long-term gain is maybe in the short run, I would have less after-tax wealth, but by then being able to really manage lower taxes in the future, eventually I break even and I have more after-tax wealth.
Okay.
And may have to live to a certain age before I see those long-term benefits.
Okay, so then conceptually we've spoken about it. What are 3 techniques people can do to generate taxable income?
Okay, so you got to meet spending needs, and we talked about the conventional wisdom is you spend on taxable first, then until it's zero, then you switch to tax deferred, spend that down till it's zero, then switch to tax exempt and spend that down till it's zero. So 3 techniques to shift away from that. One is no Roth conversions. You just simply, I'll lower my distributions from my taxable account and offset that with increased distributions from my tax deferred account. That would generally increase my taxable income because all that money coming out of the tax deferred, like if I reduce my taxable distribution by 10,000, increase my tax deferred distribution by 10,000, that 10,000 of the tax deferred is 100% ordinary income. 10,000 out of my taxable account, I was probably selling shares to do that in the scenario I'm describing because you can't avoid qualified dividends. So I was selling some shares. Maybe the cost basis of that 10,000 was 7,000. So 7,000 of that came out tax-free. The other 3,000 of that maybe is long-term capital gains. So I'd have 3,000 of long-term gains, but I don't sell those shares out of the taxable. I reduce the taxable income by 3,000. I instead cover that $10,000 spending need through a distribution from my tax deferred account. That increases my taxable income by $10,000. So that's one option. That's not going to be the solution ultimately, but that's an option. The second option is the idea of Roth conversions. I cover all my spending from my taxable account, and then I voluntarily convert from my IRA to my Roth IRA to generate more taxable income. That will increase my tax bill, and I also just simply pay the tax bill through a further distribution from my taxable account. So it could accelerate spending down the taxable account as I pay those additional taxes as well. But in the meantime, I'm moving. It's because I wanted to generate more taxable income because I'm doing this because apparently I can do it at a lower rate right now, lower effective marginal tax rate. So I generate more taxable income by voluntarily distributing from the Roth IRA from the IRA as a conversion, direct conversion to the Roth IRA. And then that gets money over to the Roth to give me that flexibility in the future where when I take that Roth distribution, when it's qualified, it does not add to my taxable income. So I want to generate that taxable income now because apparently I can do it at a lower rate. And then in the future, I can spend without generating taxes at a higher rate. So that's the Roth conversions, and that we'll spend more time on that because that is really the answer that we're looking for here. And then the third option is long-term capital gains harvesting. Usually we talk about tax loss harvesting. Now we're talking about gains harvesting, which doesn't have any of the wash sale rules or anything. I can sell and then immediately repurchase the asset, which then forces me to pay and create taxable income. Any gains will short term if it's less than a year, long term if it's greater than a year. I probably mostly want to focus on long-term gains when doing that because especially if I'm still in the 0% bracket with that preferential income stacked on my ordinary income. I didn't have much ordinary income. I still have a window where I can generate preferential income at the 0% bracket before jumping into the 15% bracket. So I go ahead and generate that income. It's taxable. I pay taxes, but it's at a 0% rate. I've really just increased my cost basis, which will lower the tax pressures in the future if I have to sell shares.
And just to again make it completely obvious, why would you do that? It's the last statement that he said, because you're resetting your cost basis. So then, if you're not gonna, if the taxes that you're gonna have on an asset are going to be de minimis over the course of the year because you're going to be at the 0% tax bracket, as opposed to in the following 3 years, you have income coming in and it's going to bump you up 2 or 3 brackets above that, then it makes a lot of sense from the present value calculation to take that hit now at the 0% tax bracket, simply put, and you reset your entire, or as much as you want, your capital base for taxable accounts. So you do it now because you're going to benefit significantly going forward.
Yeah, and I do get questions about this sometimes, asking like, what should be the priority? Should I do Roth conversions or should I do gains harvesting? And it's tough to answer. You could probably dream up a scenario where it would be better to do the gains harvesting before the Roth conversions. But I think in general, without further analysis, it's probably the case that Roth conversions should be a higher priority. It's like, well, if I could either do a Roth conversion or I could harvest gains, probably in most situations, Roth conversions would be a higher priorry than gains
Intuitively,
harvesting. But there could be exceptions.
my mind went right to Roth conversions, but this is without even like looking at an Excel sheet or anything. Roth. That's just me, but I agree with your intuition there as well. But I'm sure you have spreadsheets to back that up as well.
Well, or at least you could create a spreadsheet where it'd be better to do the gains harvesting first. But I think that would be the less common.
That's more of an edge case, I think.
I think it's an edge case, but I don't even know where to begin with trying to figure out what edges that would be.
Fair enough. Okay. Wade, something I'd just like to say, for all of these things that you were mentioning in terms of spending first from this and that, just to echo on previous episodes, at the end of the day, though, the most important thing is to maintain the integrity of your asset allocation. So if you are selling from your taxable account first, most likely that's going to be equity-driven holdings, such as an S&P 500 index fund or a small cap value index or something like that, right? And so you want to make sure on your tax deferred and on your tax-free accounts that, as you're selling certain asset classes, you're kind of proportionately adjusting the portfolio on the other side. Since it's a tax deferred or tax-free account, there aren't going to be taxable gains on that as you rebalance. But that's important. You don't just like blow through your taxable account and do not touch the allocation on your other ones, because then you're effectively going to be,
Yeah,
completely off on your allocation. Wade?
that's a great point. You always want the asset allocation to come first before asset allocation, because otherwise, late in retirement, if you're kind of down to just having a Roth IRA left, well, the
And
asset
all the
allocation
REITs are
argument
coming
is
in, you know?
that's where all your emerging market, small cap value type funds are. But by that point, no, you probably have to deviate from the asset allocation principles to make sure you have enough fixed income or other assets for a comfortable asset allocation, even if that has to be in the Roth. Absolutely.
All right. Any other thing we missed here today?
No, I think we got a good foundation for then in future episodes we'll dig into the pitfalls with the Social Security and Medicare and that sort of thing. And then we'll really revisit this again for how to most effectively think about a Roth conversion strategy. So I think we got the foundation in place.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening in, and we bid you adieu.
Until next time on Retire with Style.